Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And once again, it has been a while, hasn't it? I usually get very busy around this time of year. I feel like I say that every single time around the August to October months, and that's because it's generally true. I usually am getting into the start of getting back into my job, and just life is generally very busy in September, so I almost always never have time to make content in September. But then October offers me a little bit of levity and gives me more time to make content again. So once again, I am back and happy to be here. And I love October, one of my favorite months, if not my favorite month of the year, because I love the fall season, and I also love Halloween. Be expecting once again to have a very special video coming out on Halloween. I've done ranking videos the past 2 years of horror movies that some of which I've seen, some of which I have not, for two iconic slasher franchises, so maybe based on that pattern you can guess what ranking I'm going to be doing this year, but I am going to leave that a surprise. But that will be coming out on October 31st, as those other two movies did. But today I do have a sort of regular episode of my content. I'm bringing you a new episode of quick album reviews. As with all these episodes, I will try to keep my thoughts on these albums as quick as possible, but if I have more to say on an album, then I will say it. And these albums will be from varying degrees of recency, with some of them being as recent as just a couple weeks ago or in September, but some of them being a little bit further down the line just because I didn't get the chance to talk about them, and I did want to give my thoughts on them. So let's not waste any more time. Let's discuss these 7 albums that I have on the docket. So first up, we have one of my most anticipated albums of the year in Ethel Cain's newest release, Willoughby Tucker, I Will Always Love You. Now, her album from earlier this year, not really even an album, more classified as a transitional EP, Perverts, was definitely a very controversial one in her fan base, because it was decidedly not what people had come to expect from Ethel Cain. It was an ambient record, not much singing on it at all outside of a couple of songs. It was more focused on creating atmosphere and oftentimes really making you have to pay attention and stay along for the ride. It was impressive that she was going to come out with an album this year as well, and I was definitely very excited for this one. I was especially very excited to hear this album was going to be a prequel to Preacher's Daughter, which was one of my favorite albums of the year it came out. Just a real masterwork that has only grown on me over time. In fact, I think I may have been almost a little too harsh on it at the time it came out, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars when it came out. I'd probably bump that up to a 4.5 out of 5 at this point, and a very strong 4.5 at that. So I definitely was looking forward to this one, and I especially loved the lead single, Nettles, that really established what this album was going to be like. Definitely a more soft and more somber experience than Preacher's Daughter was, not having as many big cinematic moments, but still delivering an emotional punch nonetheless. And yeah, I would say the rest of the album really fits up to that idea. This album is more folk-inspired and definitely is bringing some of the more ambient stuff that she was doing on Perverts, although less horror-inspired, I would say, for the most part. I think some people might be quick to dismiss the depths of this album simply because it is about a teenage romance, and the fact that people will dismiss teenage romances as ones that aren't necessarily supposed to last anyway, but the way that Ethel pursues the depths of this romance and how it reveals both her character as well as Willoughby Tucker's, and how they were both a product of the environment that they grew up in, and how they ultimately were not able to help each other in their insecurities, it makes for a rather poignant tragedy that is really heart-wrenching to listen to, and I think very powerfully executed. I think Tempest is an incredible penultimate track, really just puts you into this almost religious moment on the album where there's this big tornado that is coming, which is sort of a representation of all the calamity that was inevitably going to happen on this album with these two trying to come together but ultimately not able to, and the fact that their star-crossed romance was just going to be that, a horrific tragedy that would lead ultimately to the events of Preacher's Daughter. And the closer, Waco, Texas, could well be my favorite song of the year. I mean, just talk about an incredible track with so much emotionality behind it, and really just doing a great job of detailing the whole story of the album in 15 minutes, and it never once gets boring. It is just so powerful and so beautiful. I really was tearing up by the end of it just because of how well it was executed. And Nettles, the lead single, is definitely still one of my favorites on the album, with some of the toughest and most devastating lyrics on the album, such as Ethel Cain saying to love me is to suffer me, playing into her character's own insecurities about how she feels like she's not really deserving of love because she has been conditioned by her abusive father to believe that she is not really deserving of it in the way that she should be. I'll have more to say about at least one of the songs when I talk about the best songs of the year, but I mean, this is an incredible release. I almost wish I had done an individual review of it because there's so much that you could analyze for this release, but there are also a lot of other albums I wanted to talk about. Still, you should not let this one go amiss if you haven't heard it. Even if you will need to dedicate some time to it, because it is 73 minutes long, it's quite a long album, I think it's worth it. Very strong 4.5 out of 5 stars for me, easily one of my favorite albums of the year. Next up, I'm going to talk about what is definitely going to be one of the biggest pop albums of the year, and that is the newest from Sabrina Carpenter, Man's Best Friend. Man, this one was subject to quite a bit of controversy, especially surrounding the album cover, and honestly, I don't really feel like giving my take on the album cover. I just don't really have a passionate feeling about it one way or another, just sort of like I don't really have passionate feelings about Sabrina Carpenter as an artist. I do think she's a talented vocalist. I do think that her last album, Short and Sweet, was probably the closest we've come to seeing her real potential, even if I do think that album had some real flaws to it. And I'm still not sure that Sabrina Carpenter is that distinct of a pop vocalist compared to a lot of the new pop vocalists that have risen up around her, like Olivia Rodrigo or Chappell Roan. She did find a niche that worked for her in Short and Sweet, making songs that could be a little bit wryly satirical and knowing where she was using herself a little bit as a punching bag, realizing that she is not very good when it comes to choosing relationships and that she often doesn't treat her partners well. And this album is playing into those themes once again, but I don't think it works as well as it did on Short and Sweet, both musically and lyrically. I do find this one to be a little bit vacant. I don't think Sabrina Carpenter really shows herself that much. I think she really is disappearing behind the persona that she's created, and it makes her not feel very accessible on this release. Now, that's not to say there aren't some good songs on here. There are some ones that I really do enjoy. I like Tears a fair amount. I think it is very catchy and 80s inspired, and it's definitely not something you haven't heard before, but I do think it is a fun song on the album, and I do like when Sabrina plays into her very upbeat sensibilities. I think this one works very well. The music video is also quite a bit of fun. I also do think Go-Go Juice is probably my favorite because this one does do a good job at balancing between the satire and the harsh reality, as Sabrina Carpenter talks about her struggles with relationships and how she, and really her newfound fame as well, and how she can often turn to bad vices, including alcohol, to numb the pain that she's feeling. And the song does a good job of playing into that with this upbeat, sort of smiling through the pain atmosphere that it has. I think it is the song that works the best in tackling the themes that this album has of her covering up her insecurities with layers and layers of irony. But there are also some issues on this album. I do think that Sabrina Carpenter makes herself look almost too unlikable in certain songs, such as Nobody's Son or We Almost Broke Up Again Last Night, where they just feel more annoying than anything else. But then we have some okay songs that sort of redeem the album later on, such as the closer Goodbye, which I think is pretty good, and I like the ABBA inspiration on it. And I will say that When Did You Get Hot is sort of fun, even if it is another one that is covering itself in layers and layers of irony. But yeah, overall, this album just didn't do much for me. I do think it is a step down from Short and Sweet. Musically, it's just not as interesting, with Jack Antonoff's production not doing much on this album, and it does admittedly feel a little bit rushed. I think it makes sense why Sabrina released a new album so soon, because of how much she just exploded on Short and Sweet, but I do think it pales a little bit in comparison, and it's, while not a bad release, it's just very mediocre to me. 2.5 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up is a new album from one of my favorite pop punk bands in the scene, and what I would say could be one of my favorite bands in general, just because of the sheer caliber of their discography, and that is Rise Against with their newest Ricochet. And wow, what the heck happened on this album is all I've got to ask. This is genuinely terrible. I was dumbfounded the first time I heard this. I actually held off on listening to this because I was genuinely dreading it. When I heard the first single, Nod, I was just impressed by how bad that song sounded. Just cliches of lyrics that they've done before, but felt like they were filtered through ChatGPT. Tim's voice sounded terrible on the song, and the production value just reminded me of Saint Anger by Metallica, but somehow even more flimsy and ugly. I guess it was trying to go for this raw sound and not as polished as Nowhere Generation, which I do like Nowhere Generation. I think it's a genuinely great album. The second single was a little bit better. I liked Prizefighter a little bit more, and it reminded me more of old Rise Against, but even that one just sort of paled. And that's generally what the rest of the album is like. The rest of the album is sadly much more like Nod, and I mean, it is a rough listen, is all I have to say. I was so disappointed listening to this. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. The production from song to song is just really bad, and yeah, like I said, the lyrics are cliched throughout. It feels like Rise Against has little to nothing to say here, and it makes for a listen that is just perplexing from front to back. The only other song besides Prizefighter that I think gives me something to gnash my teeth onto is Black Crown. I do like what that one is going for, and it's the only one where the raw production I think does favors. But I mean, the biggest disappointment here is Tim's vocals. They are bad on this album. It does, like I said, remind me of Saint Anger, where the vocals have just such rough and shoddy production on them that it sounds like he is straining on so many of these songs. The title track is a huge example of this. State of Emergency, Sink Like a Stone, all of these are ones where his voice sounds just really rough. But it is undeniably Nod that is the worst song on the album, and maybe the worst song that Rise Against has ever done. Man, it hurts me to say this because I genuinely like Rise Against as a band. Always have, I would say, ever since I got into them. But this album is just a huge low point for them. I'm just really hoping that this is a misstep, because I just don't see how they could get worse than this. And I hope that that's not a prophecy of things to come, because Rise Against is so much better than this. I think that's hard to deny. 1.5 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up is one of my most anticipated albums of the year, There Was a Light Here by metalcore band Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter is a very important band in my musical journey. They were, like, for probably many in the Christian scene at least, and I would say even many outside of that scene based on what I've read in YouTube comments and whatnot, they were my gateway into getting into metalcore. They really were the ones that made me get into the genre and make it be one of the ones I pay the most attention to nowadays. So I owe a lot of credit to them. And while I do think that Demon Hunter isn't as strong as they used to be in their heyday, from their debut to Extremist, I still do really appreciate them as a band and still do find them to be very solid within their genre. I do think that post-Extremist, the band has not been as strong as they used to be. I do like some of their albums, Outlive and Onward. I have even grown on Outlive, while unfortunately I have shrunk on War and Peace. I don't really love those as much as I used to, although there are still some good songs on both of those albums, and I do appreciate Peace for seeing Demon Hunter experiment a little bit. But then they came out with Exile, which is an album that has really only shrunk on me over time. It is easily Demon Hunter's weakest. So I was very hopeful that this new album would see them get back on track, and thankfully, I think that is the case. Now, I don't think that this album is better than any album from Extremist back for Demon Hunter, but I do think it is maybe their strongest since Outlive. I would say that I probably like Outlive a little better, because I do think Outlive is more energetic and has more variation in its musicality, but I do like that this one has a very strong thematic focus in talking about death and the hope of an afterlife, as well as how we mourn those who we lost. It is a very genuine album and a very honest one in that regard, as Brian Clark, the lead singer, talks about the death of his mother. I love the opening track, My Place in the Dirt. It is sort of similarly classic Demon Hunter, or sort of a similarly classic Demon Hunter opener, even, I would say. It may not hold the same impact as an opener like Not Ready to Die or Crucifix, but it does still work, and I really do like the guitar riff that goes throughout the song. It is so much fun. And it sees Demon Hunter in the most negative place on the album. I would actually say this album is one of the most optimistic overall, but it does make sense that they would start in this place, especially as Brian is really dealing with the fallout of his mom's death here the most. I love Sorrow Light the Way. I think that one might actually be my favorite on the album. I think it is a really strong, sort of more clean-centered song on the album, and it reminds me a lot of something that Demon Hunter would have done on the Triptych. In fact, a lot of the softer songs on this album do feel like the softer moments from the Triptych, which I do like that Demon Hunter is alluding to some of their older sounds on this album. Just that I do think it's not as strong as what the Triptych executed. There's no softer song on here that matches up to the heights of The Tide Began to Rise or 1,000 Apologies. But I do think this one's pretty strong, as this one really sees Brian tackling his grief, and he talks about how he has been silently suffering, but that he's hoping that his sorrow will eventually light the way to some sort of redemption. And there's a breakdown here that is sort of surprising, but really works, as Brian just lays it all bare and talks about how, yeah, his mother has just died, so how can you expect him to really conduct himself in any other way but as someone who is grieving. Their highlights would include Ouroboros, where I think they do a better job of tackling the political state of the world than they have done for quite some time. Very catchy By a Thread, or the lead single I'm Done, as well as Reflected, which is a pretty cool penultimate track that I think might get a little underrated in the album. But there are definitely some weaker moments on the album that I don't love. First of all, I do generally think this album goes a little bit too long. This was a problem I had with Exile as well. Certain songs just overstaying their welcome a little too much, and it gets to a point where you just are sort of waiting for the song to be over. The Pain in Me Is Gone is one of the primary examples of this, where they just repeat the title of the song quite a bit in the song. I do like the chorus. I do like the beautiful vocal harmonies in the chorus, but I don't think the chorus is strong enough to make this song shine overall, and it is one of Demon Hunter's weaker ballads. I also don't really care for Breaking Through Me or Overwhelming Closure, which is probably the weakest song on the album. Overwhelming Closure in particular just doesn't do much for me and feels a little bit cliched. But I do think the strong moments on this album shine pretty bright. I do think that this is a return to form for Demon Hunter as well, and I am happy to see them back. I am happy to see them back in a place where they feel more like the Demon Hunter that I grew up with. And while it's definitely not as strong as, like I said, their heyday, I do think it is a pretty good album, and I do think it comes pretty close to Outlive, which is the strongest that Demon Hunter has been in their modern era, so I will definitely take that. Solid 3.5 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up is the newest from We Came as Romans, All Is Beautiful Because We're Doomed. And this one was admittedly a very pleasant surprise for me. I actually think this is a pretty great album from We Came as Romans. I've seen people not loving this one, but I genuinely think it's pretty great, and is one of the best things that We Came as Romans has released since Cold Like War. I really do think that they have some solid tunes on here, and they experiment as well in ways that I think work. Now, admittedly, the version of Bad Luck on the album I don't love, especially the filler da-da-das that are in it, but the version that they do with Currents is awesome, and could well be one of my favorite songs of the year, because they replace the sort of cheesy gang vocals with a guitar riff from Currents that is just killer. But as it is on the album, it is a bit of a weaker track, but thankfully, after Bad Luck, we do get some very strong moments. I think that Lake of Fire is pretty heavy for We Came as Romans and really impressed me. Red Smoke is genuinely awesome, and While One by One might be a little basic, especially in its chorus, I do think its catchiness works. The closing tracks are also pretty awesome. I think that Nope, Circling a Dying Sun and So Lost Burning Flowers in particular are two very strong tracks from We Came as Romans. In particular, So Lost Burning Flowers feels sort of like classic seminal We Came as Romans, and I really appreciate it for that. And Circling a Dying Sun is a pretty powerful cut that really leaves an impact in its less than 3 minute runtime. There aren't that many issues I have with this album. I think it's a pretty solid one. I do think Culture Wound is a little too weird for its own good, and I feel like No Rest for the Dreamer comes and goes without leaving much of an impact, but this album is pretty great, and I do think it is a strong step forward for the band. I'm really excited to see where they go forward with the sound. Strong 4 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is the newest album from Alex Warren, You'll Be Alright Kid. The only reason I'm really reviewing this album is that I was sort of morbidly curious how it would sound, especially because of how utterly overexposed Ordinary has been. I have a hard time sort of understanding why this song works, but then again, it seems like songs with evangelical or religious undertones are doing really well right now, and I don't know, it just feels like some of our top pop songs this year have been more akin to like really not interesting CCM songs that are just leaving no impact whatsoever. I don't think this is as bad as some people are building it up to be. Now, admittedly, there are definitely parts of this album where it feels like Alex Warren is a product, where it feels like there are certain songs made here that are just meant to be slow danced to at a wedding or just meant to be played in a grocery store. Songs like Eternity or Ordinary or Who I Am just don't do much for me. Although, when you delve into the lyrics of Who I Am, it is at least a little bit substance-filled. But a lot of this just doesn't do much for me and just leaves me feeling bored to tears. There are some upbeat moments on here that I like, such as the song Bloodline with Jelly Roll. This is a stop clap anthem that I think could be viewed as very cheesy by some, just very Mumford & Sons adjacent, but I do like it for what it's doing, and I do think its inspiration actually does feel earned. And Getaway Car might feel like a cheaply done rock song, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like a breath of fresh air on the album, where a lot of things are downbeat. I also don't mind On My Mind with Rosé. I do think that her and Alex Warren have surprisingly good chemistry, and the song Burning Down is probably the best song on the album, even though it came out a couple years ago, actually, and it's actually part of an EP that Alex had released earlier of what was supposed to be You're Alright Kid Part 1, but I guess because of how famous he got, they just decided to combine it to create a sort of double album. I do think Burning Down is the best on the album simply because the guitars do have more bite, and it has the most interesting lyrics, as Alex is talking about his toxic experience with the social media hype house. Not your cup of tea at all. I can understand why some people think that this is bad. It's just, to me, I do think that there's worse to complain about out there. Light, 2.5 out of 5 stars for me. And finally, let's end off with an album that came out all the way back in July, but one I've been wanting to talk about because of how much I loved it, and that is Let God Sort 'Em Out by Clipse. This album is just absolutely dynamite from front to back. Not many issues with it at all. I love almost every song on here. It really is just such a fun rap album with pristine production and superb features. Both of the lead vocalists here are just excellent. I just absolutely love how both Malice and Pusha T present themselves here. Although I do think Malice shines a little bit brighter here, which is impressive to say since Pusha T is a very talented rapper. I just think Malice has some And finally, let's end off with an album that came out all the way back in July, but one I've been wanting to talk about because of how much I loved it, and that is Let God Sort 'Em Out by Clipse. This album is just absolutely dynamite from front to back. Not many issues with it at all. I love almost every song on here. It really is just such a fun rap album with pristine production and superb features. Both of the lead vocalists here are just excellent. I just absolutely love how both Malice and Pusha T present themselves here. Although I do think Malice shines a little bit brighter here, which is impressive to say since Pusha T is a very talented rapper. I just think Malice has some excellent verses on here. such as on the song NTB TTF, just simply an awesome track, or the very powerful opener, The Birds Don't Sing, that is a bit of a surprising one with how somberly it opens the album and has a beautiful vocal performance from John Legend. But without a doubt, my favorite here, and probably one of my favorite songs of the year, is Chains and Whips, which has a absolutely dynamic feature from Kendrick Lamar. I mean, Kendrick just can't stop winning, and he is continuing to do so here with a feature that just absolutely is mind-blowing. I love this album. Not much to say besides that, because of how long ago it was. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just know that this is a great rap album, maybe the best rap album of the year I've heard so far, and yeah, I absolutely love it. Strong 4.5 out of 5 stars, one of my favorite albums of the year. So yeah, that was this episode of Quick Album Reviews. What were your thoughts on any of the albums I talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.